Good evening and welcome to Gibson's Bookstore Remote. I am Elizabeth from Gibson's Bookstore, and I am very pleased this evening to be joined by author Dave Wedge. Joining us again at Gibson's. He's joined us several times in person, at least once before virtually. We're glad to have him back. Tonight, he is joining us with his new book, Riding with Evil, Taking Down the Notorious Pagan Motorcycle Gang, which is a thrilling, in-depth true story of a dangerous undercover mission to take down a vicious gang. So Dave, you're gonna tell us about some murder, some mayhem, some mugshots, some motorcycles. Please tell us about this story.
You got it. Well, thank you, Elizabeth, and thank you, everybody. See, there's some people chiming in from Indianapolis, from Boston. Wonderful. Love that you guys are supporting Gibson's. Just got to say, the pandemic was hard on everybody, and I'm sure it's especially hard on bookstores. I know that from our last book, Hunting Whitey, which was kind of the last chapter in the Whitey Bulger saga. I wrote that with my frequent co-author, Casey Sherman. And that book came out right as the pandemic was beginning. And so that was difficult. So I'm, buy local. Thank you all for jumping on and supporting Gibson's. If you want to read this book, please pick it up from Gibson's. So this is the latest, Riding with Evil, right here. And I wrote it with a gentleman named Ken Croke, right there. So Ken was an ATF agent in Boston. He actually worked down in a town called Bridgewater, a little bit south of Boston, probably about a half hour south. And he had a team of agents that he worked with. He was a supervisor at the time. And he was basically, putting together bomb cases and gun cases and, some drug stuff and things like that. And, black market, cigarette trafficking, things like that. He was getting near the end of his career. He had a wife who was also an agent. And three beautiful daughters who were, in their junior high school years when this case started. He wasn't looking to do an undercover operation. It wasn't anything that was planned. What happened was a call came into the Boston FBI agent, the Boston ATF headquarters, with a gentleman who was a biker, and he expressed an interest to introduce some agents to the Devil's Disciples, who were a gang operating in Massachusetts at the time. And there was the potential that they were going to merge with the Pagans, which is a bigger gang, a more violent gang, and they're the Hells Angels' sworn rivals. So Ken, earlier in his career, had worked on some pretty famous biker cases out in California, including one where an agent infiltrated the Mongols, which is one of the bigger, more violent gangs on the West Coast. So Ken had that biker experience. He had done over 1,000 undercover operations in his career. So he started looking into it. And what happened really, the way Ken likes to tell it and the way we tell it in the book is that, these cases kind of unfold organically. It's not like you say, hey, I'm going to go undercover for 6 months and try and break up this sort of faction. You start and you see where the case leads you. And every day is unpredictable. And certainly that's the case when you read this book. You'll see that, there was not much that Ken could plan for. Every day he woke up with a plan of what he was going to do, but every day that changed based on the activities of the gang. So, Ken started meeting with these Devil's Disciples, and eventually they introduced him down to the Pagans in a chapter in Long Island, New York, which is really the hotbed of activity for the Pagans. They were formed in Maryland in the late 1950s, early 60s. And they expanded to New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Virginia, West Virginia, and eventually headed up towards, they wanted to open a chapter in Massachusetts. They actually now do have a Massachusetts chapter. But at the time, which this case happened in 2009, was when Ken started getting involved. The Devil's Disciples, who are what's called a support club of the Pagans, which means that they're friendly. They're not rivals. They help each other out when possible. So the Devil's Disciples were meeting with the Pagans, and the Pagans wanted to open a chapter in Massachusetts, and they were looking for recruits, and Ken was one of the guys they were looking at. So Ken started meeting with them, and they said, yeah, we like this guy. We're going to bring him down as a prospect, but he's got to come down to New York. That's where the story really starts and takes shape. Ken suddenly is immersed in this biker world and he becomes a prospect, which means it's basically like you're a pledge, like in a fraternity, except this fraternity is created in hell. It's a lot more than making people drink too much or sing stupid songs. It's beatings. It's requiring them to, uh, do things that they wouldn't like to do. A lot of sleep deprivation, things like that, and they basically become servants to the other members of the gang. So Ken suddenly finds himself living in New York as a prospect, and he starts to, really get inside this culture. They start to trust him, and I don't want to give away the whole book, but there's a lot of twists and turns. And hi there, Marcy, checking in from Alabama. Wonderful. Um, there's there's a lot of, Ken goes through, as you can imagine, a lot of trials and tribulations as a prospect. At one point, he actually gets kicked out of the club for reasons, nothing that he did wrong, but internal club politics. Finds his way back in, and eventually he becomes a fully patched member of the Pagans. Now, the interesting thing about this book and why I wrote it was because Ken is the only police officer to ever become a fully patched member of the Pagans. Their claim to fame was always that they had never been infiltrated by law enforcement. They had rats and informants over the years, but never had a cop gotten inside the gang and become a member, as had happened with other similar gangs, like the Hells Angels had been infiltrated many times. The Mongols I told you about, some of the other ones had been as well, but Ken's the only cop to this day that's ever become a fully patched member of the Pagans. And he ended up being in the gang for this whole operation was a couple of years, but he was actually a patched member for over a year. Long story short, he lives that life. He rises up to sergeant at arms. He actually becomes a sergeant at arms of the, he represents, the sergeant at arms is the enforcer for each chapter, but Ken becomes like a regional sergeant at arms, which means his job is to protect members of the Mother Club. The Mother Club is the group of bikers, of Pagans that oversees all of the chapters, kind of like the board of directors, you could describe it as. And actually, Ken ends up being put on an elite squad of enforcers. So he really got high up in the gang, and then the case, he makes the case, and he ends up taking down there's a huge RICO racketeering, federal racketeering case that comes out of this operation. And again, I don't want to give away all the details, but suffice to say, Ken put away a lot of bad guys. And for me, the way it started was I was a reporter. For those who don't know me, know my story, I grew up in Brockton, Massachusetts, just south of Boston. I went to Boston College, and when I came out of school, I started working for newspapers, and I became a crime reporter at local papers. And I got to the Boston Herald in 1999 and started really covering some bigger national crime stories for the Herald. And I stayed there until 2013 and covered the bombings of the Boston Marathon. And that was my first book. I wrote with Casey Sherman, my frequent collaborator. We did a book called Boston Strong that became the movie Patriots Day, about the Boston Marathon bombings and kind of the heroism that happened there. Then I wrote a few more books with Casey, and then this one we had just finished. Casey and I had just finished a book called Hunting Whitey, about the Whitey Bulger case. It was right after Whitey Bulger got murdered, so we kind of write the final chapter in that whole organized crime saga, where we tell you the story of what Whitey's life was like on the run, how he was actually captured, and then what his life was like in prison, and then how he was actually murdered behind bars in 2018 down in West Virginia. So we had just finished that book. I was looking for my next project, and Casey and I decided we were each going to do a project on our own, and then we're going to come back together and do something else we're working on now. But so a mutual friend of Ken and I, an ATF agent, called me. I knew him from playing hockey, and he said, "Hey, there's a guy that I want you to meet. He's got a great story." And he actually had played hockey with us a little bit too. And I didn't really know him. I just knew him by face, because he's a hard to miss guy. He's 6'4", bald, big goatee. So, hey, remember that guy? Oh yeah, I remember that guy. And so we ended up meeting with him and having a coffee. And it didn't take me long before I knew that this was a heck of a story. And by hour number 2 of our conversation, my jaw was on the floor. I couldn't believe what I was listening to, and I was pretty sure I had my next book. So That was 2019, and Ken and I worked together for the past 2 years, and the book came out last Tuesday, and I'm super excited to share it with you all. And I see we do have a question in here. Marcy says, how is Ken not in witness protection since he broke the Pagans' claim to fame in addition to the insult of being infiltrated? That's a good question. So he wouldn't go into witness protection because he's a police officer. So they generally don't put police officers into witness protection, but so to speak. But he does have protection from the ATF. He, is a pretty, private person at this point. He doesn't advertise where he lives. He's not on social media or anything like that. And, he's careful of what he does and where he goes, but he's retired now, but he is an ATF agent. So he knows how to conduct himself. He's armed and he's a police officer that did a dangerous operation and he survived it and he put some bad people away. But there's a lot of police officers that do that. And I'm sure many of them are concerned for their own personal safety. But when I've talked to Ken about it, he's pretty comfortable that the ATF looks out for him. So that's that one. Here's a question from Pat. To rise that high, Ken had to break laws, right? How was that rectified with putting his case together? And how did he process internally and morally with what he witnessed and participated in? So, Pat, great question. Ken had, when you do these kind of undercover cases, agents and police officers do get special permission from the agency to participate in certain crimes. They're not allowed to harm people. They're not allowed to obviously participate in murders or allow other people, if they know that a murder or something is going to happen, they have to stop it, even if it means coming out of role. We get into that in several places in the book. I think you'll find it very interesting how he handles those situations. As far as morally, I think, he has a very strong moral compass, and he's the kind of guy that, he does this work for the right reasons. So he didn't participate in anything that he, felt uncomfortable with. And in fact, a big part of the story is what doesn't show up. Everyone talks about the case, and 20 guys were indicted and all this stuff, and all these weapons and guns taken off the street and drugs. But what Ken talks about a lot is the crimes that he feels like he stopped, including assaults on people, conspiracies, and even there was some women that their safety was threatened, and Ken intervened in certain ways. Again, I don't want to give away the whole story, but a big part of what Ken feels like with this case is the stuff that doesn't show up on paper is how he was able to stop crimes from happening. So, and that's a big part of these cases. It's not just about arresting people and putting them in jail. It's about stopping these people from hurting communities. And that's really what this case is all about. We have one here from Elizabeth. Dave, how does Ken or any undercover agent compartmentalize the horrible things they do in the name of good? Similar kind of answer. Ken, first of all, his ability to compartmentalize is pretty incredible. He has an iron trap memory, and that's a big part of the case too, is that he's constantly being challenged by these guys. These guys are they're not dummies. They're some of them are criminal masterminds, and they're very deviant in their way of thinking. So they're asking Ken a question about something innocuous about, in Ken's role, he has a fake identity and he's answering their questions under his assumed name and his fake identity. They may ask him the same question 3, 4, 5 weeks later. Ken has to remember the answer to that question the same way, because they sure do. And if he answers it differently or gives them different information, that's a way that they get caught. So it was a constant game of mental gymnastics for the guy. So yeah, his brain was working on overdrive the entire time. So we have a question here from Marcy. How do you handle hearing, describing, knowing, writing about these things also? Good question, Marcy. I've been a crime reporter for my entire life, so 25 years, and I've always compared it to, you're like an EMT or a firefighter or a police officer, where you do get a little behind the crime scene tape and you hear and see things that maybe a lot of people don't or wouldn't want to. And um, I guess I've got my own way of coping with those sort of things. But I feel like this book, the reason I wrote it and the reason I write all my books is because I think society needs to know about these kind of heroes. Ken is a hero, and he wouldn't like me to say that, but he is. We're lucky to have people like Ken that are willing to take on these really difficult assignments in the name of justice and keeping communities safe. So that's part of it. That kind of gives me a purpose to let people know that while all this bad stuff is happening, there's good. In addition to that, I feel like all my stories, I like to have people facing challenges and facing struggles, and then having some overcoming obstacles, and there's a sense of redemption. And certainly we have that here with Ken, where he put his entire family on hold for a couple of years, and his marriage was impacted. There's a lot of stress on the marriage from being away so much, and he changed during the case, and you'll read about that in the book. But he was able to get through it all, and today he's happily married to his wife still, and they're they've got a great life, and their kids are amazing. And so I like to tell stories that have maybe they're dark, but they do have a good ending, and I think that's what this is here. Pam is asking, could you share just one story from the book? Sure. Let me think. So there's a great story, and if you guys Google a little bit about the book and my name and Ken's name, you'll find some excerpts that you can read. There's a website called crimereads.com where you can read an exclusive excerpt, and one of them is this. So Ken, the gang has these things called Mandatories, which is basically a mandatory event that every member and prospect has to attend. You can't say, oh no, I've got my kid's birthday that weekend, or oh my mom's 80th birthday, I can't remember, I have a wedding to go to. You have to go. You drop everything and you go. These people are outlaws. They don't operate by the same rules of society as most people do. And they get on their bikes and they drive to Ohio or Pennsylvania or Maryland, and they go, or New Jersey, and they go to these huge open fields and they set up camps for a weekend, and it's just debauchery. It's a bacchanalia. There's strippers, there's kegs, there's bands, and there's no rules. The local police, I don't know if they turn a blind eye or they just have, not really, what is a small department going to do with 2 or 3 officers against 1,500 drunken crystal meth tweaking pagans? So Ken's at one in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, one of these weekends as a prospect, and he wears a gold chain with a charm on it that was given to him by his mother. And he's walking through. It's nighttime, and he's exhausted. He's been working, hauling around tables and moving beer cases and getting food and basically being a servant to the members of the gang the entire weekend. Exhausted, no sleep, dirty, smelly, no showers, sleeping in a tent. And he's walking through the woods at one point through a path, and he's approached by a group of pagans, actual members of the gang, 4 or 5 of them. And one of them sees his chain and says, "Prospect, give me your chain." And Ken says, like I said, he's a big, tough guy. But remember, he's on his own here. He doesn't have a radio. He doesn't have his gun. He's got a cover team, which in an emergency could conceivably arrive. Ken could text them, but they were miles away because, again, it's a small town. So 4 or 5 ATF agents in unmarked cars would stick out like a sore thumb. So they kept far away from these events. So Ken says, "No, it's not happening." And the pagan says, "What did you say?" And long story short, he says, "You're not getting this chain." And the guy says, "Why not?" And Ken says, "Well, it was, what is it, given to you by your girlfriend?" He said, "No, it was given to me by my mother. You're not getting it." And they end up having a big brawl. Again, I don't want to give away everything, but they have a brawl, and another pagan, a member of the Mother Club, comes along and happens upon it and breaks it up. But Ken took a real bad beating that day. He was beaten with axe handles. He was hitting the ribs and probably suffered some broken ribs. No medical attention again, and he wanders away, licking his wounds, and goes back to prospecting. And he stayed and continued to do this, and eventually got through all this hazing to the point where he was able to infiltrate the gang. So it's it's to think of someone, I don't care that he's 6'4", 240 pounds, being alone on your own with no protection in that sort of situation is a pretty terrifying thing for anybody. And Ken wouldn't say that he was afraid, but I can only imagine the fear that probably gripped him in those moments. And Elizabeth posted the excerpt there. Thank you. And Marcy says, that's amazing. I'm a lawyer, although not criminal. So I really like a reminder that there is good in the system. I agree, Marcy. And as a journalist, the same thing. We hear about these horrible stories all the time and how bad organized crime is. But it's nice to know that there are some good outcomes here. Let's see here. We got Lisa from Edinburgh, Scotland. Nice to see you, Lisa. Thanks for joining. I'm wondering, the Pagans are not international. I believe there may be some in Canada, but not in Scotland. I'm sure there are biker gangs in Scotland. I haven't looked into that though. But and the Pagans. So just so everyone knows, that the Pagans are mostly on the East Coast, but recently they have expanded out to the West Coast. So there is actually a West Coast chapter now. So they're growing. And there was a big story, kind of a part of our book, in the New York Post last week, where they're talking about the Pagans in New York City, and that they're actually recruiting pretty heavily right now. They're trying to grow the gang, which is scary because these guys are outlaws. They deal drugs, they traffic in weapons. There's a lot of human trafficking involved with in the form of prostitution, things like that, extortion. They shake down small businesses in the communities where they operate, and all these drugs that are coming through our communities. The heroin and the fentanyl and all that stuff. It's trafficked by organized crime, whether it's Dominican gangs or the Latin Kings or the Crips or the Bloods. The bikers are a part of that organized crime network, and they profit off the misery in our communities. So it's again, any way that law enforcement can interrupt these operations is a good thing, and that's part of the story that we tell. Pat chimes in, says, Dave, any prospects for a movie, a series, or even a podcast? All of the above, Pat. We've been in some talks with different Hollywood entities. As I mentioned, one of my other books was turned into a movie, Patriots Day, the movie about the Boston Marathon bombing starring Mark Wahlberg. So, the hope is to get this one there. I think it would make a great series. It's very different than Sons of Anarchy because it's true, and it has that kind of Donnie Brasco, The Departed sort of feel to it, with the intrigue with the ATF, and then you have the whole personal struggle with Ken and his family, which is almost a Sopranos-like angle where, Ken's pushed and pulled between, just living a regular domestic life with his family and being involved in this crazy world with these bikers. So it certainly is a great story. It's very cinematic. I think if you read the book, you'll see that it has those cinematic elements, and hoping to get it done. So we'll see where it goes. Someone says here, I'm sorry, it's Elizabeth. Ken's work resulted in 20-ish indictments, which doesn't seem like a large number. I presume that means there are wider implications. Yes, so the original round of indictments was 20, but then there was some other cases that followed that stemmed from the work Ken did. That was at least several, 10, 15 more indictments, and even to this day, a lot of the intel that Ken gleaned from his 2 years undercover with the Pagans led to other investigations that are continuing today. And there's federal operations going on as we speak into the Pagans. And also, remember, 20 doesn't seem like a lot, but that Long Island chapter was eliminated from his work. So that community no longer has, the clubhouse where they operated out of is gone. So that's a good thing, and Ken always says, those 20 guys, getting them off the street, that's a lot of misery that was averted, because each one of those guys is, involved in many, many different types of crimes, whether it's drug dealing, arms trafficking, like I said, extortion, prostitution, things like that. So there's a lot of people who probably should thank Ken for eliminating those people from their lives. Matthew says, at events like Sturgis and Laconia, do the police have a direct connection and understanding with bike leaders? So Sturgis and Laconia are a little interesting because those are events where a lot of the bikers there are just motorcycle enthusiasts, regular people, good people, quality citizens. There are some of the clubs, like I think Sturgis, I believe, is the Hells Angels. I think Laconia is neutral. But there's one down in New Jersey that the Pagans do. It's called the Roar to the Shore. And we write about that in the book. And the Pagans run that event, basically. And anyone there, like the Hells Angels, can't go to it. If a Hells Angel showed up at that, there would be a really, really, really violent result. So, as far as the police go, I can't speak to Sturgis and Laconia, but I know in Wildwood, New Jersey, where they have Roar to the Shore, it's kind of a passive show of force where the police kind of let them go. We write about it in the book where certainly the police don't allow crimes to go on if they're aware of them, but you can't start to have cops start infiltrating their meetings and breaking up their gatherings. If you do that, you're going to have some problems, and the police would be outmanned, frankly. So a lot of what these events are about, and they do things called runs. The bikers, the gangs will go on runs where they all hop on their bikes, and you may have seen it yourself on the highway. You'll see a convoy of motorcycles with all the gang members, 20, 30, 50, 100 of them. And they'll go through a town, and they'll, it's a thunderous noise, and you got these big intimidating bikers riding. And those are really a show of force to let these communities know we're here and we can cause some damage if we want. Fascinating culture. It's a crazy underworld that I didn't know a lot about until I met Ken and started investigating and researching and listening to his stories. And certainly the biker world is alive and well, as we outline in this book. This case was 10 years ago, and since then there's been a lot more Pagans cases, a lot of Hells Angels activity, and a lot of other gangs as well. So Elizabeth is reminding everyone that Riding with Evil is available from Gibson's. Support your indie bookstores. There's a link there to purchase the book if you'd like. Elizabeth, I'm not sure if I can send you some signed cards, and if anyone would like a signed copy.
Signed cards sound great. I do still have a couple questions before
Sure.
I know that you mentioned someone asked about a podcast. You do participate in a podcast regularly. Do you want to talk about that really quickly?
Sure. Yeah. So we have Casey and I have a true crime podcast. It's called Saints, Sinners, and Serial Killers. Elizabeth, maybe you can put the link in the chat. It's if you go to buzzsprout.com and Google or just Google Buzzsprout and Saints, Sinners, and Serial Killers, you'll get a link, and that will link them to every platform it's available on. So they just click the one that they like to use, whether it's Apple or Google or Amazon, whatever. But it's available on all platforms.
It's about true crime.
Yeah, it's a true crime podcast. We talk about all the cases that we've covered in our careers, all the books we've written. Season 3 will be starting up in the spring, and certainly we'll do an episode or two about Riding with Evil. And also we're bringing the podcast to the live stage on April 20th in Boston. We're doing a live stage show at the Wilbur Theater, where Casey and I, it'll be a night of true crime, be a multimedia experience with videos and music and actors acting out vignettes, and it's going to be music. It's going to be really, really cool. So that's April 20th at the Wilbur Theater. So we're storytellers, and we're trying to tell it as many different platforms as we can, whether it's books or movies or TV or now the live stage.
That sounds really, really cool. And I know that you do have to duck out soon, but I have a couple questions. So,
Sure.
Is there anything that the average civilian can do to help against these kinds of gangs? This seems very dangerous and perhaps like a job best left to professionals. But is there anything small that civilians can do?
Yeah, I think, it's kind of that whole see something, say something sort of thing. So, if you see this sort of gang activity, again, whether it's the Latin Kings or the Crips, Bloods, or the Pagans or the Hells Angels, just because someone's riding a motorcycle doesn't mean they're in a gang. And that, there is a certain amount of, biker prejudice out there in society. But, the majority of motorcycle enthusiasts, and I'm looking at Marcy here, says that her husband rides a Harley and owns a motorcycle shop. And she said, most of them are 99 percenters. So these guys are the 1%ers. And that comes from a famous quote from the old days where they said, 1% of bikers cause all of the problems. So these guys, they wear that like a badge of honor. I'm a 1%er. I'm one of the bad guys. They like being bad guys. They're outlaws. That's why they're called outlaw motorcycle gangs. Most of these motorcycle enthusiasts are law-abiding, good citizens. But the Pagans are not. They're outlaws, most of them, and a lot of the Hell's Angels, a good amount of them are outlaws as well, and certainly Devil's Disciples. And some of these, there's actually a gang called the Outlaws around Massachusetts. So, in answer to your question, I think that if someone has a concern about actual biker gang activity, they see them gathering in a clubhouse or something, you may want to let the local law enforcement know and have them check in on it. But certainly don't approach them.
No, that's a job to leave to the professionals.
Yes.
Definitely. I don't know how accurate this is. I'm not a motorcycle rider. I have a healthy fear and respect of going 45 miles an hour or faster on pavement. And I think that's fine for someone else. I have often in my head conflated motorcycle riding as kind of like the new horseback riding. You get to go real fast. It's really exciting. It's a bit athletic. I mean, like you're hanging on, you're doing turns. You have to balance a bike. It is athletic. It's fun. You get to go zoom. It's fast.
Yeah.
So it's most motorcyclists are just having fun.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, Ken, it's funny you bring that up. Ken talks a lot when we do interviews, and in the book, we talk about it a lot, where one of his biggest fears, everyone says, were you afraid of getting caught and getting outed and getting killed by the Pagans? And his answer is that, he had a couple of fears. And the number one fear that he really had was being killed by a Hell's Angel or attacked by a Hell's Angel. Number two was getting killed on the motorcycle. Because they are, they're very heavy pieces of equipment. As you said, it takes a lot of strength to ride them. And remember, these guys are riding, 10, 12, 14 hours straight in the cold, in the rain, in the foul weather. A lot of them are drunk. They're on crystal meth. They're sleep deprived. Ken was sleep deprived, and he tells some incredible stories about some of the near misses he had on the motorcycle. People forget that with these biker gangs, those things, a motorcycle, I don't care how big the guy is, if he gets hit by a car or a truck or a van, he's losing that battle. So it's a dangerous world that they operate in.
Very, very dangerous. I think perhaps our last question tonight, and I will remind everybody the book is available from Gibson's Bookstore. And Dave, sounds like you're sending us a couple of signed bookplates, which will be great. Pat asks for our last question. Since you have written these books on crime, have you been threatened or approached by those you have written about or by their associates?
So I get that question a lot. And, Ken and I talked about that, and I talked about my agent and all that. So I was a journalist for 25 years. And I was at the Boston Herald. So I wrote about a lot of really bad organizations. I wrote about, Whitey Bulger and his gang, again, the Latin Kings and MS-13, you name it. I have been threatened in the past. I did a big expose about a group called the Zulu Nation, which is a global organization in the hip hop community. And I did a big expose for Vice magazine a few years ago where the leader of the Zulu Nation was accused of sexually abusing some young men in the group. And the Zulu Nation was accused of covering it up. And I got a lot of threats with that one where, one was pretty serious. So, but early in my career, when I started becoming a crime reporter, I talked to my editors and the people that had more experience than me, and I asked them that question, do I have to be afraid, and am I at risk? Should I get a gun? That sort of stuff. And generally, organized crime folks have bigger fish to fry than killing a journalist or attacking a journalist. They may want to scare us sometimes to get us to stop writing something, but generally, prosecutors, police officers, and journalists and civilians, they generally leave alone except in extreme circumstances. So, but I stay on my toes, and I try to protect myself. And I think at the end of the day, I'm reporting a story. I'm not attacking anyone. I'm not assaulting anyone's credibility. I'm reporting the facts, and these people live by the sword, die by the sword, so they have to live with what they do.
Well, I'm glad you're staying safe. Thank you for joining us this evening. Again, everybody, thank you for joining us as we welcomed Dave Wedge, author of Riding with Evil, Taking Down the Notorious Pagan Motorcycle Gang. Dave, thank you for taking time out of your evening to share your story with us.
Thank you all, and thank you for sharing your time with me. And Elizabeth, thank you for supporting authors, and I love your store, and I hope to get back soon. So thank you so much.
We'll see you soon. All right. Good night, everybody.
Bye, everyone.